Welcome to Forbes Newsroom. My name is Cat Oriel, and today I'm joined with Andrea Hailey, the CEO of Vote.org. Thank you for joining me, Andrea. For those that might not be familiar with your background, could you tell me a bit about yourself and how you came to be the CEO of Vote.org?
My name is Andrea Hailey. I'm the CEO of Vote.org. I grew up working in civics, always had a family that was really, really active, working as poll workers, really cared about elections. I think it comes naturally to me and my family. My grandfather was in World War II, a Black man from South Carolina. And when he came back to South Carolina after fighting in the war, he came back to a state that didn't want to see him vote or participate in elections. And I think I grew up always knowing that voting rights could be rolled back, that showing up and having your voice heard is important, and with a dedication to preserving access to the ballot box. And so now that's what I do every day at Vote.org.
Why was Vote.org founded back in 2008?
Vote.org was founded originally as long distance voter, helping people who were overseas to be able, like military and people who were living abroad, to be able to cast their ballot. And then quickly realized that, there's all 50 states have different laws for voting, and quickly realized that Americans needed a one-stop shop for voter registration, to find their polling place, to be able to request absentee ballots, and to find out everything they needed to know about what's happening in their state. And so now Vote.org is in all 50 states. People can just go to the site and easily use it and register to vote in under 2 minutes.
When you say that Vote.org is nonpartisan, what exactly does that mean?
That means that really it's up to our users who come to Vote.org to decide for themselves who they want to vote for. Our job is to make sure that they have access to the ballot box, and that it is easy to go to the site and just see what the laws are in your state, how you participate. So we don't advocate for any specific candidates or anything like that. Our job is to make sure that you have all the resources that you need to participate in your local, state, and federal elections. And so that's what we mean by nonpartisan. We don't think that voting should be a red versus blue issue. We believe it's a red, white, and blue issue that's in our Constitution. And so our job is to just make sure you have all the tools and resources you need to participate.
With your background in politics, you have worked for Democrats on Capitol Hill. How do you think that you're able to separate your own views and biases from the nonpartisan nature of the company?
I know what my job is. And my job is to make sure that when you click on Vote.org, what you see is anything that you need to participate in elections. And I think that all of us as individuals have the ability to, register to vote, to go out to, for me, I live in Indiana, so I have to vote in person, because in Indiana, you can only, if you're under 65, you can't vote by mail. And so, go out to the polling location, and then that's the time for your individual, beliefs. But I strongly believe in the underlying value of a strong, healthy, thriving US democracy, where every voice is heard, where access to the ballot box is preserved. And that means that everyone gets the opportunity to really have a say in their local communities. I think people don't realize, we get so caught up in the national perspective and picture, that people don't realize that the things that affect your day-to-day life the most really happen in your local community and in your local races. So who's running for school board, for mayor, for judicial races, all of that affects like how you, your neighbors, your friends are going to live. And so I think the most honorable and important thing I can possibly do is preserve access, so that everyone out there gets to determine for their own selves and for their own community what direction they want to go in.
Are your main goals for the company more metric based? Are you trying to register a certain amount of people, or is it also getting that messaging out and educating people on how to fulfill their civic duties, or a mixture of both?
It's a great question. And I think it's it's both. We really want to register as many people as possible. We specifically work with a younger generation and younger demographic of voters. And so for us, really, youth engagement means that we're on-ramping the next generation into our democracy. The only way to have a healthy and thriving democracy is for the younger generation to also care and show up and want to participate in elections. But often, neither side of the aisle asks people to vote who are younger because they don't have a voting history. Much like a credit history, you have to build one before you become what campaigns would call a likely voter. So our job is to make sure that we're reaching out to people, that we're getting them involved, that we get them to come back, not just in big elections like the presidential, but in their local elections and midterm elections. And that we know that if people, participate 2 times or more, they're more likely to become a lifelong voter. So that's a lot of our work at Vote.org, is just on-ramping that next generation. And then I do think that there's a civic education component too, about like what, and I think we're having this conversation as a country. What does it mean to be an active citizen? What does it mean to really know and research the issues going on in your community? What does it mean to show up time and time again? What is kind of resiliency in our elections look like? And how can everybody have their voice heard and become the captain of their street, of their neighborhood, of their city, of their state, that kind of work. So I think the answer to your question is really, it's both. Both are really, really important. And we see that as, part of our job. Of course, we have to center ourselves around metrics too. So, we've pledged to register over 1 million new voters in this election, along with 40 other organizations, including When We All Vote and NAACP. So that work and those metrics are really important to us as we, to measure, to make sure that we're doing the best job that we possibly can that impacts voters.
How successful have you been with those metrics in this upcoming election? Has this election, the 2022 midterms, been different at all in other years past for the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing, above the numbers that we saw in 2018, which is exciting. Midterm years, historically, you see about 15% drop off in participation from the presidential election cycle. We believe this year that we won't see that dramatic of a drop off nationwide, which is exciting. We are down the road towards our goal, about 2/3 of the way. And so and several states still have registration deadlines coming up or have same day voter registration. And so we're excited. I think that, overall, some things in the national environment have also increased registrations. We saw about a 300 plus, a little bit over 300% increase in registrations right after the overturning of Roe v. Wade nationwide. So I think there are some things that are happening in our country right now that even outside of our program are organically causing people to register and causing spikes in participation. Overall, anything that creates increased participation, we're excited that people are digging in, that they're wanting to have their voice heard about things they care about.
When things in the news are happening, how do you reach out to voters exactly? Is it on the ground, guerrilla marketing, or is it online digital campaigns? What exactly is the strategy of the company to reach out to potential voters?
A little bit of everything. So, we have a lot of work that is peer-to-peer engagement. It's one thing if I go somewhere or go to a college campus and tell people, go vote. And it's an entirely different thing when people are hearing from their peers. Here's the registration deadline, I'm participating, why don't you come with me, that kind of thing. So we do a lot of work on campuses, getting leaders on campuses, whether it's student leaders or athletes or that person who just happens to have a really large social media following, getting them to post information about dates and deadlines and how you can participate locally at that school, when the absentee deadlines are, early vote, when that started. And just kind of really socializing the idea of like, hey, this is something that we're all doing and let's get out there and let's vote and let's participate. Last election cycle, we had teams like University of Alabama football team, all registering to vote, getting to 100% registration, and then turning around and telling their classmates, like, you also should register and participate. And that was really exciting. We also saw student athletes really leading at places like Temple. And I think that a lot of the peer-to-peer engagement is important. We do have some, guerrilla marketing where we put up posters, especially around registration deadlines on campuses. We have digital ads and streaming ads, and we work with platforms like WhatsApp. We created a WhatsApp voter resource bot where people can go to WhatsApp and ask voting questions in real time and get answers. We have partnerships with Pinterest and College Board. We have partnerships with several student groups all throughout the nation. And I think that the combination of all of that, we also have a text alert program that 14 million people have signed up for now, which allows people to, we text them proactively to tell them when elections are coming up and how they can participate. We have email reminders that go out. We have like billboard programs. So you name it, we're doing it. And we're out here just trying to spread the message of like participation and making it fun. I think that that's the other thing. Like we have to all remember that there are ways to make this fun, to make participation engaging. And that's the work we're trying to do.
It sounds like there are a lot of avenues that you've been hitting to try to meet people where they're at. And so besides young voters, is there another demographic that you feel has been very vital to the mission of your company?
We work mostly where campaigns won't work. Like I said before, most campaigns are reaching out to people who already have long voting histories. They're kind of arguing over what you would call like the most likely voter. And so we're really going to voters who aren't considered always the most likely voter, because our belief is that everybody wants to participate, just not everyone is getting asked to participate or given the tools and resources needed to participate. So we work primarily with, first-time voters, young voters. We work a lot in communities of color. Across the board, and yeah, that's mostly where we focus our energy. And of course, the platform, in the last election cycle, we had 39 million people come through the platform looking for voting information, and so the platform itself is there for absolutely everyone to use as a resource.
I think that the recent rhetoric about the security of our elections in this country has impacted the mission of your company and the messaging that you've had to craft around election security and any hesitation that anyone might have about whether their vote will be counted.
I mean, we just had the most secure elections in recent history. And yet there were still people who tried to spread messages saying that saying the opposite. And I think for us, a lot of our job is to make sure that we remain a trusted resource where people can just go and find out the facts. Like, what are the definitions of these different terms that people are talking about in the news? What is it that I need to know about elections? Does my vote count? Why does it count? All of those sorts of things we just want to remain a resource for. But of course, the current environment affects the work that we're doing all of the time. And that is the point. The point of the people who are spreading those rumors and lies is to undermine confidence in US elections. The idea is to make people exasperated and tired and frustrated and to feel like nothing counts for them. Because when that happens, then you drop out of the process. And when you drop out of the process, if the majority of Americans were to drop out of that process, then a chosen few can really have and exert control. And I think that is the point. And so knowing that, it's so important to be resilient in the face of that and to keep showing up, keep participating, have faith in free and fair elections, and to have your voice heard. When millions of Americans all across this country show up to vote, it becomes much more difficult for people for a chosen few to exert, control. I think that we have two types of people in this country now: those who believe in a healthy and thriving democracy where every American has access to the ballot box, and those who believe in some other style of government. And that's truly where we are in this country now. So the way to face that is for the American population to keep showing up, keep having faith in our institutions, keep being excited, have some joy and civic engagement, have fun with civic engagement, and have their voice heard. What would keep me up at night is if all of a sudden that were to stop happening. That is really the thing. And that's what those who are trying to undermine our, faith in elections, that's what they're trying to do.
And after especially January 6, 2021, another group that we've seen under attack is election workers. And so is that something you also do with Vote.org, help target and recruit election workers?
That's not the core part of our work, although we know how deeply important election workers truly are to keeping our democracy functioning. Election workers do amazing work, often for little pay or no pay often. So I think that it's really important. I mean, election workers are truly American heroes, and the targeting of them is something that we deeply condemn, and are disappointed to see and that's even come up in our, in our political space and sphere. But we do encourage people to become election workers, to become poll workers, to volunteer, to to help with local elections in your own community. I think that is really important and admirable work. It's work that I've done before, and that many of us at Vote.org have done and really encourage.
What message do you have for people, anyone who might be doubting the security and validity of our elections? You've already touched on this a little bit, but if you could give one message to someone who might be hesitant and might not think that their vote counts, what would you say to that person?
I would say your vote definitely counts. We have several elections that have come down to one vote in this country. We have some elections that have famously come down to tied votes. Virginia election that came down to a tie last cycle. So it's very, very important to show up. And I would say that not voting doesn't mean that people don't get elected. It just means that you didn't have a say in who gets elected. Not showing up doesn't mean that there isn't a power that will exert itself over your life. It just means you had no say in that power or direction or the values of those people who are in office. So not voting really isn't like an antidote to much of anything except for unilaterally giving up your own voice, kind of stifling yourself. Participating means that you've had your vote counted, that your voice has been heard, and that you have some say in the direction of your community. So I would say that for those who are, on the edge or really thinking about it, just to remember, there are a lot of people putting a lot of time and energy and resources, quite frankly, into making sure that Americans don't have the right to vote, that voter suppression laws that have been, introduced in several states, voter suppression laws have been passed in several states. So there's a reason why people are trying to disincentivize your engagement. Don't let those people win. Instead, make sure you have a voice in who's elected in your community.
Have you seen instances of voter suppression in this upcoming election?
Well, I mean, before I even get to the upcoming election, I can say that in real time, I live in Indianapolis, Indiana, and during early voting as head of Vote.org, I was CEO of Vote.org, and my local polling location had over 4,000 people in line. We waited multiple hours. Like most Americans, I had to go back to work. So day after day, I would go show up at the polling location, which they knew in advance was going to be a polling location that had a high number of people trying to participate. And because only 5 locations were originally opened in this whole city of Indianapolis to service somewhere near 1 million people, there were out multiple hours of lines. So I experienced voter suppression in real time. Now the city of Indianapolis eventually opened up more polling locations and we were able to get more people through. But I think that gives an example right there of kind of what voters are seeing and experiencing all throughout this nation. And I think in this election, we're already seeing, the monitoring of boxes, drop boxes, and intimidation in Arizona. We're already seeing, we've had voter suppression laws that have passed in Texas and Georgia. I think that they're just making it so that there's one more step for voters to try to get through and participate in. And I would say that these tactics aren't new. So they're kind of old school. Intimidation at the voting polls is as old, goes back multiple generations, right? Like this is as old as our, as the civil rights movement, quite frankly. And so what we're seeing now is that the civil rights movement is the heart of the larger democracy movement. Where the very systems and mechanisms by which we participate in this country are under attack. So whether it's poll workers, to your point earlier, or people intimidating voters at drop boxes in Arizona, no matter what it is, we're seeing a collective moment in time where, of course, certain populations are more targeted than others, but where the very mechanisms of our democracy are being attacked by those who don't want to see free and fair elections. And I think that is a scary moment in time. But the antidote to that is participation. The antidote to that is to show up time and time again, to jump through any hoops that are put in our way. And then ultimately, the antidote is to have legislation, pro-voter legislation passed. The ultimate antidote is for people to realize that we can, in this country, build a system where we get to 80% participation, where we get the highest number of Americans through that system as possible. Right now we have, even in the largest turnout in our history, we have like 60% participation. So around there. So, I think that we know how to put a man on the moon in this country. So we certainly know how to get people through elections in a way that is streamlined and easy. We just need the political will to do so. These are all and then I'll let you ask your next question, but these are all, we have to realize, policy choices. So standing in line for multiple hours, that's a choice. That's happened somewhere. Someone made that decision to create logistics that created that problem. No voter in our country should have to wait more than 30 minutes in line. We should be able to streamline this, move people through the system, and make sure that one day we get to 80% turnout where every American's voice is heard, or as many Americans as possible that their voice is heard.
My next question is, what lawmakers have you been calling on, if any? Has Vote.org been trying to hold lawmakers accountable to make sure that these policies that are making it harder for people to access the ballot are overturned?
At this point in time, a lot of this is getting argued out in the courts right now. So at Vote.org, we filed a lawsuit in Texas looking to strike down one of their voter suppression laws. A federal court judge in Texas agreed with us in that case. And the case now continues forward up on appeal. In Georgia, we also filed a lawsuit against one of the voter suppression laws that affects our Vote.org users. And so, yes, we're fighting back every day at Vote.org, and we really want to make sure that people are able to participate in the most effective way possible. We did advocate for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. We did advocate for the People Act. So we know that ultimately, at the end of the day, our program is amazing, but nothing really beats having huge pieces of federal legislation that really work to ensure our elections and access to the ballot box. I think that what people don't necessarily realize is what we're almost not even in the position to get to a new place. What we're really trying to do is get to the place we were before. The Voting Rights Act was gutted by the Supreme Court in 2012. And so many of the protections that were inside of the Voting Rights Act now lack an enforcement mechanism. And what that means is that I was born with more protections and voting rights than I have today. And so what we're really trying to do is get some of those protections back in place and make it so that we can really look to that future, that dream future that I've been speaking of with that 80% voter turnout. To do that, we need voting rights protections. We need federal legislation. We'll need people to keep showing up and participating in every election. And we'll need ultimately the political will to build systems that can accommodate that number of Americans participating.
My last question is just, more on a personal level. You are the organization's first Black CEO. So tell me a little bit about what that means to you and how you feel your perspective has helped the company's mission.
That means this is deeply personal to me. It means that the issues that I'm working on affect me and my family directly, that I can almost watch with precision how different members of my family, what our voting experiences are, and what our access to the ballot box truly looks like. I think that being a Midwesterner and being a Black woman, I think the combination of those two things gives me perspective on voting experiences that people don't always have if you're sitting in California, where you have every ballot mailed to you, which is fantastic. Or if you're sitting in another city that has better access. And so I think these issues, to me, they're not theoretical when we're discussing them, when we're writing about them, when we're doing that outreach and advocacy. And I think it brings another level of passion to my work. It's the reason why I wake up every single day and get back to work even during elections when it's very grueling and the hours are tough, is because I'm really fighting for people I love and care about, my own family members and myself. It's deeply, deeply personal. And I think that I grew up with the saying, or with the quotation in my head that was taught to me, which is Coretta Scott King's, that freedom is never really won. You have to earn it, and you have to earn it and fight for it in every generation. And so I know that this generation, we have new tools. We have digital tools. We have new, people used to, I think of Medgar Evers registering voters door to door in Mississippi. And I now know, and you had to register people one at a time. Now we can register people, thousands of people at a time at an organization like Vote.org with digital tools. And so I think about how I carry forward the legacy, and then how I carry this, how I step into the space of carrying the work into the digital age. And yeah, I think that it helps me to, when you feel like you're on mission and like your mission affects everyone you love, then you show up with an extra amount of energy and an extra amount of excitement and an extra amount of passion to do the work.
Thank you. That's the end of my questions. Do you have anything else you would like to add before we close?
Yeah, I would like to add one thing, which is I was so honored and lucky to be able to walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge with John Lewis before he passed away. And I looked at him and I said, what is one of the things in voting rights that you did then that we've forgotten to do now as we work to protect our elections? And he said, you have to keep your joy. And I didn't know what he meant at the time. And I sure do now, which is, I hope everyone out there registers to vote, use vote.org. It's super easy. Make sure you participate, make sure you have all the information about your state rules, and then make sure 3 people around you also have it. And make sure that you use the words of John Lewis in the back of your head and say, keep your joy, have fun with it, keep your joy in it, make it a party, take your friends and family, get to the polls, participate in elections. Midterms are super important. It sets up for, everything that's to come in our communities. And keep participating, dig in, do the work. We're excited to partner in with Americans all across the country and make sure they have their voice heard.
Thank you so much for joining me today.